Hello and welcome to our Leaders Live on local democracy today. Apologies for joining you a little bit late. We have had a couple of technical issues, but we're here now and happy to talk about anything that you want to really. So please do use the chat functions below or the comments to add your questions. We do have some pre-submitted questions which we're going to answer, but we'll try and get back to everyone as much as we can. So please use that opportunity to send things in. However, to start with, I would like to welcome Councillor Jeff Hanna, who is the portfolio holder for Transformation, Resources and Governance, who is joining me today to talk about some of the important issues facing BCP Council at the moment, and will also help me answer some of the questions later on. So hello, Jeff.
Hello, Millie. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, so the first two issues that we want to talk about on this local governance topic are really pertinent to BCP at the moment, and it's because we are looking at changing the way that governance is done across BCP and actually, you know, looking wider across the whole country. Devolution is one of those words which has been around for a long time. We know that our nations like Scotland and Wales have devolved powers, and really this is around continuing that agenda and giving communities a lot more say over how governance is done in their area and decision making is done in their area. With devolution, we know that we have some decisions to make. And since we have heard more from government about what they are expecting from us, we are narrowing down our options into how we progress with devolution. It's really important to say this is a once in a lifetime change for local residents. And so it's really vital that we get the right decision from it. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the options that we have on the table. So devolution is around bringing powers from government down to a strategic mayoral authority. So as you know, in other parts of the country, there are mayors in some of the metro areas like London and Manchester who decide on strategic issues. So where you have like a large transport network which crosses over lots of local authority areas, the mayor is an accountable person to take a lead on the strategic look of how we do things in terms of transport, in terms of planning, in terms of infrastructure. So we submitted to government a expression of interest in September to say that we wanted BCP, our area, to be a devolved area. So we would be the strategic authority and powers from government would come down to us for us to make decisions on. However, on the 17th of December, the government published a white paper, which is an initial policy document, which said that we would need at least 1.5 million people. So that has really changed the framework in which we look at devolution and what is going to be possible for an area like BCP. Our neighbours have also been looking at this, and we have essentially two options of what we can choose to be devolved within. One of those is called the Heart of Wessex, and that includes Somerset, Wiltshire and the Dorset council areas. This is a very rural area. We're talking about small towns and villages. We're talking about issues that aren't particularly aligned with our urban interests and the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis and the strategic issues that we have. And also things like, you know, there's a lack of coastal communities, which is a really important thing, I think, to local residents, and things like our strategic transport, which stretches across our urban footprint rather than looking far out to other areas. The other option that we have is the Hampshire Solent option. Now, we share those infrastructure issues with them. For example, we use the A27, the M3. We also have the route through the New Forest. So we are quite aligned, and we have the rail networks as well that we use. So we have lots in common with them on those strategic transport issues, and they also have similar urban coastal communities. So things like the Isle of Wight, Southampton and Portsmouth have really similar issues to what we experience on a local level. And so there's a lot more alignment there. One of our problems, though, is that there's a forest between us and them. They also have the complexity of going through local government reorganisation, which is another part of the government's devolution white paper. And the other thing that I think is quite important is around our identity and whether we would actually identify with having a Hampshire mayor. For example, if a mayor was elected from Portsmouth, would they really reflect the needs of us all the way down the coast in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole? The final complication with that side is that we don't currently share any services. So at the moment, our police authority, our fire authority and our health services are done on a county basis across BCP and Dorset, and fire obviously includes Wiltshire for that. So we would have to dismantle systems and then rebuild them on that Hampshire framework, which isn't impossible, but that is a huge task. And I think it's important we consider that as part of this conversation and make sure that we make the right decision for the long term rather than just a quick decision. So we have made the decision to take this through full council, where we can have a proper, open and transparent debate. I do feel a little bit like this is on a very tight timeline, and I wish that we had longer to properly consult residents, to look more, test the options. But because of that change on the 17th of December, this has had to be a really quick process. And the way I'm looking at it is this is an indication to government. If we don't get what we need from the devolution, essentially the deal at the end, then we will have the option to opt out. But we need to keep our options open at this point and make sure that we give that indication to government, which we'll be discussing at tomorrow night's extraordinary council meeting. So just moving on from devolution, the other issue that we have locally is the community governance review. So where we think of devolution as creating a layer of governance above local authorities but below government, the community governance review looks at existing and not yet existing levels of government that could be below the local authority but above, the community. So just to talk about community governance, we should have a governance review every 15 years. And my view is that that really should have happened during local government reorganisation to look at how we actually do democracy on a more neighbourhood or community level. BCP is a large local authority. And I know, as a resident of Poole, that because of its size, sometimes there feels like there is a little bit of a gap between neighbourhood level residents and the council. And actually, other areas, not just in BCP but across the county and even across the UK, have tackled that issue by creating community or parish or town councils. So our colleagues over in Christchurch, during local government reorganisation in 2019, they established town and parish councils for their area to be able to raise the local needs of residents there and be able to have a say over how things are done in their area in a much more robust level. And we never had that option in Bournemouth and Poole unless we were to go through a process of creating councils on our own. So what we decided to do as BCP Council is do this all at once. Basically use the opportunity to ask residents whether they want to have another tier of governance beneath BCP that specifically works on a neighbourhood or community or a town or a parish level. So I'm just going to pass over to Councillor Jeff Hanna. I understand that Southbourne have been considering this opportunity, and it would be really interesting to hear from you as a councillor what has happened and what the proposal is from Southbourne.
Okay, thanks, Millie. Basically, we already have what's called Southbourne Forum, which is a kind of debating society, discussion society about ways in which to improve the area. It has no powers as such. It has no money to spend on the area, but it can make representations too, and it works with various groups in the area, including local businesses, to try to improve things. We had a meeting of the forum in December once the community governance review had been announced, and all 4 Southbourne councillors were there, and we were sharing with those who attended what the community governance review was all about, and floating the possibility of some kind of parish council, town council, call it what you will, for the wider Southbourne area. That would include Southbourne and Tuckton, right the way to Hawkesbury Head. That was quite enthusiastically received, and a vote was taken that we should submit a formal submission to the council with a proposal for a local council for the area. It has come to be known as the Southbourne Community Council proposal rather than town or parish. Whether that will change in the future, I have no idea. But the thinking is very much that we've seen the way in which Christchurch Town Council, for example, is able to raise a little bit of extra money through its council tax precept. That enables it to spend on the immediate area and to make improvements that BCP Council, because our finances are pretty tight at the moment, would not be able to make in the current financial climate. And Southbourne Forum members thought that this might be a good idea for Southbourne. A proposal has been put together. It's yet to be finalised and submitted. It does suggest a small precept. We're talking about the possibility of £20 a year. £20 per year would, based on the number of properties in the area, raise £200,000, which could be put to good use. Improvements with parks, improvements in the town centre, improvements in the cliff top, Hawkesbury Head, and so on. So the thinking is this would be a good way for local people to have their say as to how that little bit of money should be spent. The suggestion is there would be 12 local councillors. Whether that would include the BCP councillors would be subject to election. The local community council councillors would not be paid, so there would be no costs involved there. There would be a very small cost for a clerk to keep track of what is taking place. But otherwise, all of the money, the £20, if it becomes that per year from each household, would be spent on the immediate area. So that's the kind of proposal that's going in. That in itself will be subject to consultation in the area, and it remains to be seen what happens in those terms. And it is BCP Council in the end which has got the interesting job of reviewing all of the proposals that might come in, including thinking about what will happen in those areas where no proposal is made, and coming to an overall plan for the BCP Council area and what local councils, what town councils, parish councils, etc., there might be for the long-term future. So that's the thinking in Southbourne, and we're quite hopeful.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for explaining that from your community. It's great that residents of Southbourne want to get involved and creating a parish council. I think how I've been thinking about this as well is that, you know, the whole of Dorset is covered by community, town or parish councils. And actually this is the opportunity for Poole and Bournemouth to think how they could do it. It may be the outcome that actually nobody is interested in having a parish council, nobody wants to have that structure in place, but it's great to hear that Southbourne is keen, and I would encourage other areas to think about how that might work on their local level. I just want to clarify as well that we have the community governance review is set in national legislation, and so we have a very short time frame. Community governance reviews have to be done within a year. We're currently at stage 1, which is the initial submissions of ideas for parish council areas, and that closes on the 19th of January. So this weekend is the final chance to be able to get in those initial submissions. So particularly community groups, particularly community organisations like Jeff with their local forum, I think it's worth taking a look at that and considering what could work for your area. It will then go through council for approval, and it will go to consultation as well with local residents. So everyone will be able to have their say on the recommendations that come forward from those submissions. And eventually, by the time we get to October, we will know what's going to be in place following that, and basically how we do governance on that local level. It's important to clarify that these are this is very different from devolution. They are not the same process, but we thought because they are around community governance and governance in general, it would be quite interesting to have them together in this Leaders Live. But I do just want to reassure you they are different topics. One is that local level, the parish, the town councils. The other is around government, bringing powers, bringing funding, bringing decision-making down from central government into the hands of a mayor who is voted for by communities.
Can I just throw in, Millie, that it might be worth adding that it is quite a tight timescale now. It's only 5 days away to the 19th in terms of any submissions for a town council, parish council. But if people are interested, they should go online to the BCP Council Community Governance Review. The information is there. There's a very straightforward form that can be filled out quite easily. It doesn't imply any commitment. It's simply an expression of interest. And yes, it can be filled in by a community group representing the group, but it can also be filled in by an individual who just thinks it would be a good idea for my area if we had one. So it's an easy, straightforward process if people want to explore that.
Thank you. Right, we're going to move on now to some pre-submitted questions. So the first one I have is from at Mike1 Westbrook, who is on X. He has, or she has, written, can BCP Council please advise why, under the current financial position, they are not looking to join the government's devolution priority programme, instead choosing to hold their extraordinary council meeting to discuss it the day after the government's 10th of January deadline. So thank you very much, Mike, for your question. And it is a good one, considering the government were feeling pretty firm on that 10th of January deadline. What I would say is I went to visit Baroness Taylor of Stevenage in Westminster last week on Tuesday, along with the chief executive, and we asked for her view on whether we would need to meet that deadline, or to allow for our democratic process, which is a full council meeting, we would be able to give in that indication a little bit after. And she was very sympathetic to the situation of BCP, that it's not easy because we're not a very obvious functional economic area. It's not obvious which one we should join in terms of the Hampshire Solent or the Heart of Wessex. So she was willing to give us an extra few days to allow for that democratic process to take place. And it is essential that we do make the right decision on this and not just rush into the quick decision because of that deadline. And that's what we're doing. Thank you. Right. Jeff, I think you have a question which is from Jake Ruggia.
And it is, would you consider proposing an all Dorset devolution arrangement if the government doesn't agree to a BCP only one? As Millie explained at the outline, we did actually consider the possibility of BCP only, but that has been ruled out by the government, because the government has said that it is looking at a target of 1.5 million residents for one of the new strategic authorities. So BCP only definitely is not going to take place, and even Dorset only. If you total the population, you do not get to the 1.5 million that would be required for a strategic authority. Meanwhile, Dorset has already entered into discussions with Somerset and Wiltshire, and they are looking at a Heart of Wessex authority. So that's why the option that's open to us currently, if we want to proceed in the first wave, is to look at joining the Heart of Wessex, or alternatively to look at the other authority which is in the pipeline, which is the Hampshire-based authority. So no, we would not be exploring a Dorset plus BCP for that reason. Not big enough under the government's guidelines, and the government is being very emphatic about that.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeff. So we have another couple of questions. So I have one from Sally Harris on Facebook, and a similar one from Jeff Bantock, who's also on Facebook. But Sally's question is, would you consider a devolution towards the Solent to encompass all coastal areas? And I think that's a really good question. We have looked at options. In fact, I have been presented with some of the options that have been looked at over the last decade regarding where our area would best sit. And one of the initial ideas was called South Central, which included sort of those coastal areas. However, things have moved forward, and the Hampshire Solent councils, so that includes Hampshire County Council, Portsmouth and Southampton, and the Isle of Wight. They have now submitted their interest to government in being in that priority programme and to be that collective footprint. So we are, because we didn't get the guidance on the 1.5 million and we had submitted our expression of interest, it has really closed what the opportunities are in looking at, you know, Dorset only, or looking at those South Coast ones, or even looking at a larger regional footprint. And I think that if we had had that guidance sooner, then our conversations we would have approached this in quite a different way. However, we are where we are, and the question now is, do we want to be on the priority programme? And if so, what footprint? And those are the questions that are going to be debated at tomorrow night's council meeting. Okay, so moving on to some questions away from devolution, I have had one from Ross Hodder on Facebook, which is, the planned School Street trial at Baden Powell School has been indefinitely postponed, with the reason given that there was a lack of volunteers or staff to operate the scheme. Can you comment on why this trial in particular was postponed when it might be rescheduled? What is the council's overall policy on school streets, and are you considering using external staff or ANPR to monitor and enforce rather than parent volunteers? So thank you very much, Ross, for that question. And I'm a big fan of school streets. In fact, in my community, in Newtown and Heavlands wards, we have had school streets put in for the Livingston Road schools, and it looks really good. It feels so much safer. It is about changing behaviour around schools. It is around encouraging families to walk to school or cycle, and it also is to try and reduce some of the safety issues that we have, not just around street safety and road safety, but also things like the pollution that we have right outside school gates. So as much as I'm very supportive of school streets, we have been really clear with the schools that we work with that they will need to set up the day-to-day running of this, and it is their responsibility to make sure that they are stewarding the barrier. It's not something that staff from BCP can come out to do. The government have recently released some new guidance on school streets, and it says that just volunteers means that there is likely to be issues, so they encourage for staff to be there as well. So we are asking schools to consider those staff, and if they can have, you know, teachers to be able to help steward those school streets. We are also looking at how we can use camera enforcement and use technology better to enforce on some of the school streets. But of course, it's going to be within the confines of our spend. What I would just say, though, is obviously there are lots of people watching this, and if there is anyone who is interested in volunteering or working with both Baden Powell and also Lilliput and Court Hill With School, then it is a real opportunity to get involved, because as long as there is a base of volunteers who are interested and actively making the school street safe, then the school will hopefully provide some staff to support those volunteers in that role. Thank you. Right, Jeff, over to you. I think there was a question on the town centres.
Yeah, this is coming from Sylvia Costa through Facebook. And her question is, what is BCP planning to do regarding all the shops closing? And what are you planning to do to clean the streets, as she has been experiencing and watching a lot of garbage in the streets? So first of all, thank you for the question. I think it's worth just putting a context to the answer before going into detail about what BCP is planning to do. And that is mentioning the fact that the way in which we are all doing our shopping is changing. And that's affecting town centres right across the country. A lot of us are doing online shopping. We all know about Amazon being extremely busy. And Amazon is taking a lot of business from shops that we would otherwise have shopped in. We have also created out-of-town centres, and just locally, Castle Point would be an example of that, where getting to Castle Point and parking in Castle Point is convenient for a lot of people in that kind of area. And again, Castle Point has sadly taken business away from Bournemouth Town Centre. And it's not just local, it is right across the country. There are town centres that are struggling because of those issues and the changing ways in which people shop. That said, in terms of what's actually happening in Bournemouth Town Centre, yes, we do keep hearing about shops closing, and we've just heard the news about Superdrug. What we don't hear so often is news about shops that are opening. And my understanding is the Superdrug premises are already being let for additional units. So there will be businesses replacing Superdrug. And the figures that I've been given as an update are that although vacancy rates in 2020 in Bournemouth Town Centre were at 18.2%, that's now improved, and the vacancy rate has dropped to 15.5%. So things are actually improving in those terms, even though the public perception seems to be that things are getting worse. One of the things that we're doing is we have become one of the only 4 authorities in the country that are going to be trialling a high street rental auctions scheme, which has been set up by the government. And the basic principle is that if a building or a shop has been left empty for 365 days, a full year, within a 24-month period, so they might have had somebody in and somebody leaving again, but if it's a total of 365 days within that 24-month period, the council will be able to work with the landlord to fill the space. Depends how that goes. But if there isn't agreement, what can then happen is independent traders or local groups can bid for a 1 to 5 year tenancy for those premises. and the successful bid will then get that tenancy. So there will be a real incentive to the landlord to fill the space. Otherwise, they will be facing that kind of auction. And that's a good incentive for landlords to review rents, because rent costs are one of the factors affecting businesses, leading some to close and leading others to hesitate moving in. I'd add to that another consideration is business rates. And I'm putting this purely personally, not on behalf of the council, but business rates, we get criticism. Why do we keep them so high? They're actually set by national government, not by the council. But what I would like the council to be able to do is declare a retail zone where business rates could be reduced to support businesses in that zone. That's a personal view, and it would be down to central government as to whether or not that could be introduced. The last bit of the question was referring to street cleaning, and the answer is we do have our town centres cleaned daily. But if any resident spots issues that have not been actioned by the team or that have happened after the team has already done its work, please do report those to us. Our website has got an excellent section for reporting just about any kind of problem. And once it's reported, it will get dealt with. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Jeff. I have a question here from Brian Cox on Facebook. He has asked, my question is, the Labour government insisting that there will be thousands more homes built in Dorset. Will the infrastructure be upgraded to cope with the extra numbers of people moving here, as most of the houses that will be built will not be affordable for local people? And then we have a similar question from Simon Gwynn on Facebook, which also talks about the power station site in Poole. So I'm just going to answer these ones, and then we will move on to some of the live questions. So the local plan, which BCP has been working on for a couple of years now, has been, it was submitted into examination last summer. It will be tested on the current national planning policy framework. So that is the existing policy rather than the policy which the government, the new government, are looking to adopt. However, we need to be aware that if our local plan isn't approved by the planning examiner, then we will have to start again, and we will then be working on those mandatory housing targets. And I think also the government have been really quite clear on this, that even if our local plan is found to be sound and can be adopted, then we will probably be required to look at a review, a very quick review into how we can meet some of those mandatory targets. The question about infrastructure is really important because we have existing communities, we have the services that they use, and this is about adding additional pressure to those. And the question really is around how would we cope? And I think that is a bit of a challenge to government as well. You know, in BCP, we have a very interesting area in that we have a lot of sea on one side, we have protected heathland on the other, and we have very few opportunities to expand the urban area. So do we have to look at building a lot higher? And how will that look in particularly in our town centres? And how will it change the face of our town centres? So there's a lot to be considered here. And actually, our local plan does go into a lot more detail around what we are expecting to see, what we hope to see in terms of delivering sustainable development. However, the infrastructure question does remain, particularly if we are expected to take on vast numbers of housing into places where we can't actually accommodate it without that support from government on the infrastructure. Just to touch quickly on the power station site in Poole. So this is a really important site. It could deliver, anywhere upwards from 800 homes for local people. And, I totally acknowledge that we have a housing crisis locally, and I often do speak to residents about some of the issues that they are experiencing in accessing affordable and appropriate accommodation. So that site is really important. We're currently working with Homes England, which is the government's housing and regeneration agency, to try and understand the constraints of the sites and how we can actually unlock it, looking at things like the flood risk, remediation, because it's a form of power station, and also looking at things like how we can protect some of what's already there in terms of the shoreline and open it up to people. So a paper went to Overview and Scrutiny Board last night to describe the next steps there, but I'm really pleased that we've got that support from government to look at how we bring that site forward in particular, and then we can build in the infrastructure onto that site to support that number of homes. Okay, so I am just going to look at some of our pre-submitted questions and see if there is anything that you want us to clarify on devolution or the community governance, or anything else that you wish to ask about. So I'm just looking at one from Going Nowhere, which has been submitted on YouTube, and that is: the devolved countries and mayoral councils had referenda on devolution. Surely BCP and other councils will do the same. So thank you for this question, and it is something that you're absolutely right in mentioning. Those devolved nations have had referendums in the past, and it is something that we should be asking about. However, I think that the way the national government look at it is that there was a referendum, and that was actually the election. Both governments, the Conservative government and the Labour government manifestos, did include quite rapid devolution and quite ambitious devolution. And I think that there is a mandate from government to deliver it. My question really would be whether we are being given the ability as a local authority to actually do our due diligence in terms of working with our communities and working out what is going to be the best for local residents. The government have given us assurance that they will go to consultation on this, basically between the end of January and March. So that will be an opportunity for individuals, residents, stakeholders, businesses, all sorts to go back to government and say whether they want devolution or not, and whether they agree with the footprint or not. So there will be a level of consultation, but it will be very government-led, and not so much led by the local authority. So we will be keeping people up to date if we do get to that stage following tomorrow night's full council meeting, so that everyone gets to have their say on this issue. Okay, so Jeff, I can see that you have had a question, which is from Glinster316. So why should other residents pay for the precepts for locations that have parish councils? This is unfair. Surely BCP has the facility to just charge the precept to the affected areas.
And I have to admit that I'm slightly puzzled at the question, which is implying that residents who are not in a parish council would pay the precept for the parish council. And that's not my understanding of the situation. For example, Christchurch Town Council does have its precept. I don't live in Christchurch. I live in the Bournemouth area. And we do not have a precept on our council tax which supplements Christchurch or any other town council. The precept would simply be for the area that the town council serves, and BCP's council tax would be standard across the whole of BCP, and that is currently limited by the government to at most a 5% increase. So whether or not town councils are created in other areas would not affect the council tax for residents in those areas that don't have town councils.
Thank you, Jeff. And yes, that is correct. If you do have a town or parish council, you would pay, it would be collected with your council tax. However, it would only be applied for you. I just want to explain very briefly that Bournemouth and Poole do currently have a system which is called the Charter Trustees. So this is to basically look after our mayoralty and the history and the civic side of our historic towns. Residents currently pay, in Poole, they pay £2.55 a year to support the mayoralty. I think there is a question of, even if we did go down a parish or council route, would we actually be just looking at that to support the mayoralty, and rather than look at the wider things? And I think that really is something for the democratic process. So if we hear from residents that there are legitimate and suggestions of those parish and council areas, we can then it will then be up to those elected councillors into those structures to make those decisions on what they would then precept and what they would charge to local residents to have that town or parish council. Right, so I'm just looking at some more questions which are coming in. So Aaron Gibson, you have given us one which is on devolution. So in reality, the conurbation's economic area is split across two regions, southwest and southeast. We deserve a unique settlement, as there is no joined up thinking on everything from the Network Rail to Highways England to the different LEPs. The danger with either Heart of Wessex or Hampshire is BCP becomes an irrelevance. Will the public get a say, Councillor Milliard? So just looking back to my previous answer, which was around would residents get a say? They will get a say from the government-led consultation on this if we then decide tomorrow night to go down either of those routes. But I absolutely hear you on the challenges with this. And honestly, we have been discussing all across the council. Has been the number one topic, I would say, over the last month has been devolution and how we can make it work best with those two options. Like I said, we submitted to government that very clear expression of interest that we have a lot in our area. We have an airport, we have a port, we have amazing coastline, natural beaches, we have 3 universities, we have some really, really good things that we can talk about in the economic and the regional geographical area. And actually, if government want to deliver devolution on a meaningful economic, functional economic area, then I think that BCP would be the best opportunity for that. However, the white paper is clear, 1.5 million people. And if we want to be on that priority programme, we will need to decide between one or the other. So I hope that that makes it a little bit clearer for you.
Can I just come in on that one, Millie?
Yes, of course.
And pick up on the suggestion that BCP might become an irrelevance. First of all, I don't think BCP will ever become an irrelevance. But to the extent that it looks as if the realistic choice is going to be between the Heart of Wessex or the Hampshire-led authority, I think it is worth our considering in which of those options will we be most relevant and have most influence. And I don't want to preempt anything that might be said at Council tomorrow evening, but there is a question as to how we would weigh up against the Southampton conurbation and the interests there, compared to how we would weigh up in the Heart of Wessex situation against the rural interests there. That has to be weighed up carefully. I would add to that we are talking about mayoral strategic authorities, but technically the white paper does say that the mayor can only make decisions with the majority vote of, and it doesn't specify exactly the body, but it's likely to be parallel to Manchester, where each of the councils designates councillors to attend a session where votes are taken. And it would be interesting as to how many representatives BCP would be likely to get against which other councils in each of the two authorities. How would we weigh up in Hampshire? How would we weigh up in the Heart of Wessex situation? And what voice would we have? those are factors I think that we ought to be considering at the council meeting tomorrow evening.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Right, I'm just looking at some additional questions. So we have one from, I'm going to pick Susan Lennon, who has said, this has literally just come in, look at this. What about police and ambulance service? The police blocked stretching to Devon and Somerset. How's that going to work? So in the context of devolution, the government policy, their white paper that they've put forward, and I think it's important to say this isn't official policy yet. It hasn't gone through the democratic process on their end. So there is still a lot to be teased out and scrutinised in that policy discussion in Parliament. However, when it comes to our shared services, you know, we currently have our Police and Crime Commissioner, our Dorset Police, which operate across the Dorset footprint, and then we also have the Fire Authority, which stretches all the way across Dorset, BCP, Swindon, Wiltshire, and those services have been operating on that level for a long time. What is really challenging is if we then want to dismantle those to look to the east, and we're currently weighing up the benefits, and that will inform the debate tomorrow night. And when it comes to the ambulance service, you know, as part of our health structure, health is also done on that southwest footprint. So if we were to break that regional boundary and join in with Hampshire and Solent, then it would mean reworking all of that. But I think it's really important to say that we're not necessarily looking for the easiest option here. What we want to do is make the right decision for residents so that they get the best from the government's proposals on devolution that they can. Okay, so looking at some more questions here. Oh, thank you, Susan. I'm just having a quick look through. I can see one from Steve Alves, which is question to Millie. Is it my understanding that BCP will have no choice in this and must join up to one of the two options? So I'm really glad to see residents getting into the devolution debate. I kind of feel like we got the white paper in December and things have moved so fast from there. However, I think it's something all residents need to engage in and consider. And if you do have any strong views, I would really suggest writing to your councillor, because we're going to be the decision makers at tomorrow night's full council. Anyway, back to your question in terms of us having a choice. We do have a choice. Our choice is to look east or west to be on the priority programme, or to do nothing. And the do nothing option is definitely one that is on the table, but it does worry me for the following reasons. If we're not involved in devolution, the government white paper has been clear in that it will force us into an option that they see as fit, rather than us having the decision. And they do that by a mechanism called a ministerial directive. And it's where they decide, they pass legislation to force BCP into one of those areas. So I'm not particularly keen on that. I think that we as an area need to have an open debate in this. We can come to a decision. However, our decision may be, actually, we don't want to be involved. We don't feel that devolution meets the needs of our residents, and we would rather the government come and force us into it. I think also, just looking at the benefits of devolution, there are some real benefits, but it's very hard to see exactly how they will improve the lives of local residents. I think devolution on principle is a really, really good thing. But I am slightly concerned that the government are kind of approaching this the wrong way round, with getting us to make decisions and then they'll come up with the policy afterwards. So I have been vocal on that issue, as just to give you some reassurance there. I'm not particularly pleased with the situation, but it is what it is. The government have a huge majority in Parliament, and if we want to be able to define our own future, then we need to be taking part in this debate rather than just saying no thank you.
Again, Millie, if I can add to that, there might be some residents who think, why could BCP not join in with a similar town somewhere else or some other towns? rather than one of the two options that we've been discussing. It might be worth clarifying that the government is clear that they do want each authority to have its own border all the way around, and they won't have kind of islands hopping around, joining together to make a authority in that way. So when the government, if they need to do a ministerial direction, come to do that, it will be one of the two options that we're currently looking at. So we're either making a preference view, or we will be forced into one of those two. One of the factors there that, again, we need to be thinking about at the council meeting tomorrow evening is if we wait, if we say, no, we don't want to, and those two groups both get to go ahead and start making plans, they will be making their plans and we won't be in the discussion. Whereas if we offer a preference tomorrow evening and convey that to central government, we will at least be part of the overall planning process in whichever we decide to go for. So there's a factor there to be weighed up against everything else.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So I can see that we have a question here from Noel Aaron Vizzy, who has asked, can we make a skate park in Creekmore as there is none near? So thank you very much for this question. And what I wanted to respond to you is that we have very recently just created a play strategy for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And when I say play, I'm talking about all sorts of things. So this includes play parks currently in existence. There are plans for some new play parks as well, but it also includes all of our skate, BMX, all our scootering tracks, those kind of things, and really the opportunities in which children and young people can enjoy really good, healthy activity by having decent facilities in their communities. I would really recommend going and having a look at what the plans are for Creekmore. We have refurbishments across the area, we have new play parks, and we've actually just committed over £3 million of our community infrastructure levy, which is money we collect from developers, to put into play specifically. So I'm really pleased that we have a good pot of money there to help revamp some of our play facilities in the area. But I would absolutely recommend having a look and seeing what is planned for Creekmore. And if you want to have a skate park, then I think that's something to suggest to your ward councillor and see if there are any possible spaces, and their role is to support you in getting something put in and meeting the needs of the community really in terms of their needs. Thank you. Okay, so I think we are coming to an end, but I think should we take one more question from the live stream? I'm just having a look at what's coming in, and thank you to everyone who's responding to the things that I've said. I will go through myself and have a look if there is anything else to add. So I appreciate that kind of interaction. If there is anything that you do want clarifying, then please do put it into the chat or the comment section of whatever channel you're watching in, or, you know, mine, Jeff's, our cabinet email addresses are online, and you can always access them. And I would also encourage you to speak to your ward councillor if there is anything that you feel you want to be represented, particularly in the next few weeks as we go down devolution and we also look at the community governance review. Okay, so I can see people are also putting their thoughts in, which is great. In terms of another question, should we have a look? So we have one from Colin Ayaki, which is, can we have a BCP mayor and 3 parish councils, each with a mayor for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole? And Colin, I think that sounds like a good idea. In fact, that is what we have at the moment, although in our parish areas For example, places like Herne, Throop, Highcliffe, they are parish councils, which means they don't have a mayor. Instead, they have a chair of their parish council. This is where it gets a little bit complicated with community governance, because if, for example, you know, as an example, if Southbourne, as Jeff has said, wants to create a community council, they wouldn't have their own specific mayor unless they were a town council. However, the Bournemouth mayoralty would still very much exist as long as we kept the system that we currently have, which is the charter trustees, or we moved to a town council for Bournemouth. So that would preserve the mayoralty. I can imagine that we will, if we find that residents do have an appetite for parish councils and community councils, we will probably end up in that situation where we have those individual mayors. The question, though, is then around those individual parishes. So, for example, would Southbourne actually prefer to have a mayor of Southbourne, or would they be content with a chair and leaving the mayoralty to Bournemouth? So yeah, lots in this question, and we start our discussions when that deadline closes on the 19th. It then goes forward to a community governance working group, which is made up of council representatives. They will then bring their recommendations forward for consultation, and that's when you'll have your chance to feed in on what is specifically recommended for your area.
So in theory, Millie, Southbourne residents could actually end up with 3 mayors. We could have a mayor of Southbourne for the town council. We would have a mayor for Bournemouth, which includes Southbourne, which we have at present, and we would end up with a mayor of the strategic authority that BCP would become part of and Southbourne would be part of. So it all gets kind of interesting.
It is, and we have had this conversation about, is it prudent to consult, for the government to be consulting on strategic authority mayors whilst we are also having the community governance review conversation with communities. And I'll be honest with you, the timing is not ideal, but the government have really pushed forward with this agenda, and we're given some very short timeframes in which
and it is what it is.
Yeah, and that's why it's wonderful to do these sessions, to explain that in a little bit more depth. And like I said, we're here to carry on answering any questions that you have. And I think we'll leave it there, but I look forward to seeing you on the next Leaders Live, when I will have another portfolio holder joining me to discuss something. I mean, looking ahead, it looks like council budget will probably be our next one on the agenda. So we'll make sure that we get updates for that to you. And please do, once you've got that, start submitting your questions. And if you want to join online, you can, or you can watch it back at a later date. So thank you very much.
Thank you.